Hello and a very warm welcome back to Widowed AF. You're here with me, I'm your host, I'm Rosie Moss. I'm always here. And joining me today, I have got Charlotte. Charlotte is in Manchester and she's coming on the podcast just 9 months after her husband Josh died from sudden adult death syndrome. So a very, very warm welcome, Charlotte. Thank you so much for coming on and what enormous bravery to come on so relatively soon in your journey. I can only guess, I haven't really met you yet, but I can only guess that your reason for doing it is because you want to spread a little bit of awareness as much as anything.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful to be here, so thank you. Yeah, awareness, and I think in those really, really early months, and now I'm super early anyway, I, listened to podcasts like this, people who were around my age, and it just gave me that bit of hope.
Yeah.
So, that's what I was doing day in, day out, walking, and just to listen to someone, just that bit
Yeah.
of their life gave me that, So,
And the thing with podcasts as well is you can do stuff while you're listening. So you can go for a walk, you can do the housework. And I don't know if you're like I am, but I find it really difficult to be kind of at one with my thoughts. So I've always got my headphones in, whether it's an audiobook or a podcast or music. I need something, especially if I'm doing housework, man. God, anything to get through that.
yeah.
And yeah, like you, I started listening to Nora McInerney's podcast, which was terrible. Thanks for asking. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm not the only one. It's not just me. And even though there's online groups and things, there is something about hearing people tell their story. There's a real power in that. So, talking of which, Charlotte, let's tell your story. So, again, I know the basics. I know that Josh died at 33, which is so young. And one thing I just wanted to mention was I had a look at the SADS memorial page, and there was one quote that you wrote that has just really gave me all the feels. And I'm just going to read it out. And it says, "Josh didn't just love us; he showed us and told us every day." And I just thought, how beautiful to be loved like that and to know that you were loved like that. And ultimately, the terrible tragedy, but really precious to hold on that you're able to hold on to that. So you take the microphone now, Charlotte. Tell me about Josh. Tell me who he was, how you met, and what an amazing guy he was.
Yeah, this is the good part, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
this is the fun
you
bit.
just instantly just smile inside thinking about it. So yeah, Josh, well, he was an absolutely amazing person. We when we were at uni, so yeah, all the fun of being at uni, and we were just friends then. And then after uni, he moved to London, and I thought, oh yeah, I just had this feeling. I was like, I'm going to marry him. I just felt like, yeah, he's my type of person. So we started dating, and our first date was the Manchester Christmas markets.
How
So a
romantic.
lot of fun, right? Yeah, and then every year after that, we did this thing called Craniversary. So it was always near Christmas. We went to different Christmas markets around the world, and yeah, it was just always a nice thing that we just kept up. And I
That's
just
really
think
cute. Really
it's pretty.
cute.
So yeah, we lived in London for a number of years, just lived the fast place, exhausted life, and just
Been
did
there, done
everything.
that. Yep.
Yeah. And then we got and then we got to a point where we were like, right, we want to buy a house, we want to kind of settle down, realised it's super duper expensive. So we were like, right, let's head back up north, from where I'm originally from. So yeah, we had, yeah, just some absolutely incredible memories, holidays. Josh was just such a positive, like loving, amazing guy that was just, I don't know, like, how do you describe him all around? He was so authentic, such a people person. He did it day out in his job, and he just brought that through in every part of his life.
What did he do for work? Just being nosy now.
He worked for a big media agency in London. So
Okay.
we were living in Manchester, and he used to commute most like every week to London. So he's ever since he finished uni, they've been great in terms of all they've done since we set up this amazing fund for Josh every year and do a lot of charity work with him. But yeah, had a busy job, but it was all about me and Sophie. It was
Yeah.
just, yeah, I'm very lucky in that way that we had that kind of love and family life. It was really beautiful. So yeah, it was just a dream really. Like, I knew how good I had it. I did really know. I look back and I think it was perfect until it wasn't.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Bittersweet,
um,
isn't it? Because we all want that. We all want it, and then you get it and it's taken from you, and that feels almost doubly unfair. And again, I find
Mm.
it, I we all kind of canonize our late partners a little bit, but I genuinely know, much like you, how much Ben loved me, how much he loved the children, how, how lucky we were to have him. And I'm really grateful for that. And I feel like 8 years in, I'm now able to just be grateful for that. The anger, the sort of, I don't know if it's gone completely, but initially there was just that injustice. I know, and I'm sure you know, some really shit husbands and fathers, right? And not that I'm wishing anybody dead, but you just think the difference that it made to our lives, that he was so hands on, and then to have him gone.
My gosh, yeah, it was honest. Well, obviously, I'm so early, but I just see dads everywhere. No, I feel like I didn't see them all before, but
No,
now they're always picking up from nursery. They're always walking around, and me and Josh and I had this saying where we would say, he'd always say to me like, "We'll always be 100% together. I might be 90% one day, you might be 10%, but we're always a team, 100%." Which I look at that and I'm so grateful for that now. But now, like, well, I'm 100% now. I have to
all the
just
time.
and so there's a lot of jealousy, there's a lot of rage, there's a lot of like why us type of thing. So yeah, you circle through the emotions all the
You
time.
do.
It's exhausting.
You do. I went to Centre Parks too early, actually, and I got really angry. The one of the lifeguards said to me, did you know you've got too many children per adult ratio? And I was like, I fucking know I do, because I was like, what do you want me to do? Leave one at home?
Yeah,
Like, I've got no
yeah,
choice here. Oh
yes, yeah.
gosh.
I had a similar thing where we went to this lovely play cafe and we were queuing up. I think I was with another actually widow friend that I'd met. And she said it to her where she was like, I think her partner husband was away on a stag do, and she was like moaning how she had to drop the kids off, that and the other. And I was just like, I think she said it to my friend who I was with. If I'd said it to me at that point, I would absolutely flipped because you just want people to know
Yeah,
and give them perspective. But yeah, there's also beauty living in that bubble of the unknown. I look
there
back on my
is.
life and I feel really like, do you want to,
Yeah,
know
that blissful ignorance, I think of it as,
yeah,
the idea that bad things happen to bad people and good things happen to good people. And if you play the game of life, you'll do all right. And it is a
yeah,
bit of a rude awakening. And for you at only 32, God, that's really young. And also I'm
yeah.
thinking as well, you have one daughter, but would you have liked to have more children together?
Yeah, absolutely. We were trying at the time. So there was a lot of complex. Being completely honest, I thought I was pregnant when
Gosh.
Joshua died. So I was almost grieving a baby that didn't exist. It was
Yeah.
a really complex thing that was like holding on to this. It wasn't just Josh, and as you've spoken about many times, you grieve that version of you, you grieve what could have been, what the future was. But it was almost like I planned out in my head, 2 kids, family life, we're going to move X, Y, and Z. So yeah, there was a lot around that. And it was
Yeah.
really hard to explain to someone that I was grieving that as well,
Yeah,
which
you're grieving
doesn't,
your future. You are.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, you
yeah,
absolutely are. Now, tell me a little bit, in so much as you're comfortable, tell me a little bit about, what led to his death, because I know it was very sudden, so presumably no warning signs.
no, we'd had an absolutely fantastic summer. We had loads of just the time of life we were at. It was weddings, babies, holidays, really good summer. We'd been on just, yeah, it was like the end of summer. I'd put this, lovely Instagram post up at the weekend. We'd been to Yorkshire. We had the RHS near us, and we'd been there just the day before. It was all completely normal. Woke up on what I describe as a really ordinary Monday. We both worked from home. We were working from home that day. And yeah, Josh got up. He always went for runs. He was a big runner. I think he probably got up around 6 a.m. And I was fast asleep because, like, I'll get up at the last minute
That's
and
where I'd have been as well. I set my alarm every day to get up and go for a walk or a run. And do you know how often I do it? Never, never,
and
ever. I might as
yeah,
well give myself that extra half an hour sleep and not bother setting the
yeah.
alarm.
And that's something just going a bit off topic. I get really resentful for when I have to wake up and say wakes me up at I don't know, 10 to 5 or something in the
Yeah.
morning. And I'm lucky she sleeps through. But now I'm just like, he would have done that.
There's nobody
It's just,
else, is there?
yeah. So yeah, it was an ordinary Monday. He went for a run and I took Sophie to nursery. we came back, they might have, it was, I mean, you replay the day over and over and over again, but we had probably a bit of a mundane conversation where I'd already started work by the time he'd got back, and he put his trainers in I was working in the conservatory, so he just put his trainers there. It was stressful. It was Monday. It was like planning out for the week. So he went on his day. I went on my day. Then probably around, the mid-morning or late morning, he both came down, met for the cup of coffee, cup of tea, and I don't know, I think I was complaining that I had like back-to-back calls with clients, and we were both quite stressed with just work and
Yeah.
things that don't matter, but at the
At the
time,
time, they do. Yeah.
isn't it? And it's just like, yeah, but it was all, normal chat, and we went on our way. And then I don't know, when I'm in work mode as well, I'm really, really focused. So the timings are just, I mean, it is a bit of a blur. But yeah, probably around lunchtime-ish, I did hear a noise, and I was like, so no, I probably didn't think much of it. I was just like,
Well, you wouldn't, would you? It's just a
I
noise.
literally probably thought, oh, Josh has just fallen over his chair, or, like he fought the stairs or something. I
Yeah.
just didn't really think of anything. So I carried on. I remember I was going on this call it was quite a stressful call with a client, and I don't know, I just didn't really think of anything. So I literally carried on the day, and it wasn't unusual that Josh and I, just because he worked upstairs, I worked downstairs, we just didn't see each other. And that was very normal. I tended to pick up Sophie from nursery because I finished earlier, and that was just kind of how it was. Sometimes I would like shout up and be like, "Come joking with me," or whatnot. But for whatever reason, I think I was running to the minute, and I thought, right, I'll go get her. And so I picked her up from nursery, came back, and she was at an age where it was like, get her in the high chair, get her a bit of food, and all that kind of stuff. Got in the high chair. I remember actually he always did a really lovely thing when we came back from nursery. He would always wave at the window as soon as like coming up to the door, and she'd get really excited. And he didn't do it that day, but it wasn't unusual because he could have been on a
Yeah.
call, could have, it didn't, it didn't really. I just thought, all right, he worked insane hours, so it wasn't like, oh right, just he's on a client call or something. Put her in the chair, shouting up, and there's no response. But again, on a call, like I'm not phased by them. And then I ring his phone, and I can hear the phone ringing, but I can hear it like above the kitchen where we were. And I was just like, that's really odd. So I was just, and then I did start to panic. I thought, it is a bit weird that, why is he in that room? Because we have like off Sophie's room, there's just a room that is like an office, a separate office, but we just didn't use it, or it's just a bit of a room that didn't really make sense in the house. Yeah. And so I left her in the high chair, ran upstairs, and I just I was checking the house, and I was like, well, where is he? Like, and then I thought, well, he might have gone for his haircut. Like, but it is weird. Like, Josh was always he wouldn't just leave the house and not tell me when. And then I literally turned into Sophie's room, and it was just like, I don't even know how to describe the moment. It was like, I just saw him on the floor, and I instantly knew that he'd gone. Like, it was an instant fall to, I just collapsed. Like, I was just almost do the instant, oh God, it's just horrific. It's, you instantly go into this mode of absolute panic of phoning 999 and going through everything and all that. But at that moment, I instantly thought of the noise, which I hadn't thought about. And I was like, well, and you just know, when you see them, you're like, oh, he's gone. Like, it was almost, obviously, you do everything you're told to do and all that kind of stuff. But I knew, I don't know if it's just, I don't know what it was. And it was just, a completely out of the body experience, and absolutely horrific. Everything. And then all I could hear as well was Sophie screaming downstairs in the high chair.
She's got no clue and just wants mum back.
And I'm just like, what do I do? Like, and it just felt like a really drawn out, but like the quickest moment ever. And they kept, telling me like, you need to do X, Y, and Z. A neighbour came over because I remember just running outside screaming. And then it just all unfolded from there. But I had to run downstairs. I couldn't, I was just thinking, oh, she's choking on a baby bell. That's all I could think as well. At that moment in time, I was thinking she's dying. And then yeah, no, I can't even. Baby bells as well. I'm like, as I see them in the shop, I'm like, no, no. So yeah, it was. Oh, I don't. Yeah, it was just like everything, and then you just went into complete shock, complete like. I almost knew at the moment there was no chance, but it was like you were hoping for something. I don't know that
Yeah,
this
of
was.
course. Yeah, of course. Or that, the ambulance will arrive and they'll have some magic potion
Yeah,
or procedure that can bring him back. And you mentioned it feeling a bit like an out of body experience. And as you're saying that, I can vividly remember that, the idea that this is not really happening. It's almost a disassociative state. And then that feeling of you've just seen the person that you love most lying on the floor dead, and the other person that you love the most in the world needs you downstairs. And I think what you painted there is this really vivid picture of what widowhood looks like as a parent, because you want to do the grieving, you want to be the wife, you want to be the widow, you want to be there, but also these other child or children are like little birds in the nest, they need you as well. And it's a really kind of instant, stark realization that it's just you and you're going to have to fulfill these roles alone now. And I really, really feel for you. I really do. I remember it so vividly, the police at the door and having to say to the kids, oh, they hear about the dog, because you're trying to protect them. Have you got family close to you? Did family come to you? Yeah.
at that moment, as my parents were in Norfolk, my sister was in Scotland. I was in that moment of like, who do I call?
Yeah.
Like, and I've got amazing, I'm really lucky. I've got amazing support and friends, but it was just in that moment. I was like, who do I call? So I did, friends live not nearby, and then my auntie came, and it was just this, people come. Um, but yeah, it was just a literal shock of everything. It was just sitting down and what do you
Yeah.
do? People, I think they come and they then the ambulance crew then tell you that they declare him dead, and you just like I just remember being in this utter shock state. Like I couldn't even obviously bawling your eyes out, but you're just in this like this isn't happening to me.
Yeah. I'm going to wake up in a minute. Yeah.
This is a Monday. Like he was absolutely fine this morning. Like
The fact
what?
he went for a run, right? Like it
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense.
It was like the definition of fit and healthy. It was just, and that was, well, I'll go on to it, but it was just, yeah, that's what I was like, well, what was it? Like at this point, no idea. So yeah, I had everyone ascended, and then it was, yeah, I did a lot of, well, I'm thinking about Sophie, I'm thinking about, oh my gosh, and then it's like, I need to phone the key people. Yeah, it's
And you
bad.
become this kind of harbinger of doom, don't you? You've got to ring
Yeah.
people and tell people that this terrible thing has happened. I'm
Mm,
wondering as well, I mean, one of my first thoughts, which is really weird because my baby was 6 months old, was who's going to walk her down the aisle? And you think she might not even get
yeah.
married. It's quite an outdated institution in a way. It might not even exist when she gets married, but you start projecting way into the future because dealing with what's right in front of you is probably too difficult to comprehend. Did the paramedics, were they able to give you any indication of what it might have been, or was it a case of we're going to have to go and do a post-mortem?
No, well, I know our friend James was there, and he was speaking to them. I think at this point I was just I can't really remember, if I'm honest. I
No,
think a lot of people say it is a blur. Like
total
you go
blur.
that day so much, but there's things that are completely I don't know what
Mm.
happened from that hour to that hour. But we were starting to think that it was it was something to do with the heart. There was talk of it, but I think at that point it did have to go to post-mortem scans, all that type of stuff. So that's what's happened. But I actually didn't find out for I think 2 months. It
Wow.
was it was a really long time, which was hard, really, really hard because it was like I wasn't in my head. I was like, it was almost like it was stalling. Like, well, I didn't know, so it was almost like, well, he died, but it was almost like I couldn't grieve to that next
You're in limbo, aren't you?
in limbo.
Mm.
Yeah, so it was, yeah, it was really hard to process. But I think my dad, my mum and dad both work in medical, so we were kind of like they were preparing me they were going to come back and say maybe no cut, they don't know. Like, so I was kind of, well, I'd never be prepared, but I was almost like getting medical advice. I was almost speaking to everybody I could think of who was medical to be like,
Gathering
well,
as much information as
yeah,
possible.
Yeah, which helped him, and sometimes it didn't because you go down rabbit holes, and
Yeah.
it's just, there's a lot of, I suppose, everyone has guilt in different ways in widowhood, but the guilt was real, and it still is, a lot, because you go over everything and what did I miss? Like, what were the signs? Like, you know, did he have a strange cup of coffee? Did he have an extra banana that day? It was almost, you torture yourself to a point of like, you're just on the floor with it. So, yeah.
I noticed from your application that guilt was a theme that seemed to run quite heavily through your grief journey.
Yes.
And I realized that, me saying to you, you have nothing to feel guilty about,
Mm.
that's not going to work. It's something that you're dealing with. And I wonder if it's a coping strategy almost. Like, there's a bit of bargaining there, isn't it? If I'd gone upstairs sooner, would I have saved him? If I'd done this. And of course, the chances are that he would have been dead when he hit the floor, when you heard that noise, and there's nothing that you could have done. But I do understand that rumination, that what if, what could I have done? Because in many ways, it's easier to find a fault with us, or something external, depending on the circumstances, than it is to just accept that the universe is really, really a bit of a dick, and that somebody that you love can just die like that in a split second. And that leaves you with this incredible trauma, because how do you trust that's not going to happen to somebody else that you love? And how have you, it's making me go a bit goosey.
Mm.
How have you kind of, I mean, again, it's early days, but reconciling that, I'm speaking from my own experience here, but things like if my parents don't pick up the phone on the first or even the second call,
Yeah.
my automatic assumption is they're dead. And I manage it better now, but early on, I was convinced that people were going to die, and oh, is that something that you're experiencing now?
Yeah, I mean, noises, yeah, definitely noises gets, around the house, will be, I think I'm really triggered by anything CPR related, or,
Yeah.
I see defibrillators everywhere. From what I've spoken to, I've come to the conclusion that it was extremely unlikely that, like, Josh died.
Mm.
His heart stopped and he died. So I have been able to do a lot of work. I've done EMDR therapy, and
You.
that has massively, like, massively helped. Um, so I've done a lot of work. There's still a lot of triggers. Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about it, but I suppose for Sophie, it is most likely genetic. So I just keep thinking, when's she going to die? When's that going
Yes.
to happen? It's almost, you're in this cycle of, well, it can happen. Like,
Yeah.
we're not in this perfect world. It doesn't just happen to everyone else. It's going to happen to me. It's going to happen to me again. So I'm not at that point. Maybe it
No.
has to be 2 years, but I do get a lot of triggers. I'm starting to learn how to manage it. I do a lot of work on myself. I do a lot of therapy. I do this thing called contrast therapy each week, which is like, it helps my nervous system a lot.
Just writing that down, because I've not heard of
Mm.
contrast therapy. I mean, it sounds to me like you're doing an incredible job, because you're really putting in the work to make sure that you can be the best widow mother that you can be to your daughter.
Mhm.
But this idea of genetic testing and it being
Mm.
hereditary potentially, that
Yeah.
must weigh pretty heavy on you. Is there a point that Sophie can be tested, or do you have to wait until she's older?
So they call it two things, either sudden adult death or sudden rhythmic death.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes you can find out there's loads of, it's an umbrella term, so within that there's lots of different conditions. But with Josh, they just haven't, and they just don't know, it might be too rare, but effectively when the heart rhythm has stopped, what can you find? So they've started some genetical testing, but early on I got told we had an inquest, so that was really traumatic as well. That, oh well, he should have requested to keep the spleen. And I was like,
What?
well, how was I meant to know?
I was going to say,
Considering
come on,
just
Charlotte, get your
you.
act together.
Just like, are you kidding me? So I don't know, and they never asked, and I, at that point, we didn't know what he died of and what information. My dad's a doctor, but he didn't know we'd had to request to do that. Like, so I think there might have been, and that's the regret. And you think, oh, why didn't? But in that point, I was in complete utter,
No.
So yeah, so there have been some genetical testing that's underway. There's a lot of referrals. Everything's extremely slow. I've been so angry at the system, the NHS, all completely just not joined up. And yeah, Sophie on a huge waiting list, but it is started. From speaking to a lot of other widows in my position, or when they've died of similar cardiac arrest type of, because there is a lot of
Mhm.
variations with it. They do get tested from a young age, and then over the years they'll be tested and tested, and will always be on the list. But yeah, I'm kind of in that kind of stage at the moment of finding out a bit more, and kind of it's a constant worry. I constantly think a heart beats really fast, and I go into a panic, and yeah, something you can't describe, but
It's often compared to cot death, isn't it? It's the adult version
yeah.
of cot death. Now, as a mum, and particularly with a baby or a young toddler, cot death is one of those things. It's like this spectre, isn't it, that over you, and you're so scared that you're going to wake up and find that your baby has not woken up. So, for it then to happen to the primary adult in your life, I can imagine that there's a lot of fear around Sophie, and just the idea of history repeating itself. And that must be very difficult to reconcile with, very difficult. What about your own health? Do you have sort of a bit more health anxiety, a bit more worry?
Definitely. I would say I
Yeah.
was probably quite a health anxious person before this, but I am definitely like, and obviously grief, what people don't see, they think it's very, oh, it's one emotion or it's this, that. There's a lot. I lost a hell of a lot of weight. My nervous system has been on overdrive, your head, it's just everything, like just everything. So
People do
I've been
get
to the doctor.
physically ill when they're grieving, don't
I
they? You do.
definitely really, those really, really early days, I was so ill, and
Cold sores. I
yeah,
remember her getting loads of cold sores, which is a sign, obviously,
yeah,
that your immune system is really struggling.
yeah. And I've got a bit better over time, but I do lie awake at night and think, well, why can't it happen to me? Could
Mm,
do. But I am trying to push through those, and I do a lot of running now, and I kind of think, running could it be a cause, could it be a factory? Dr. Seth, but I kind of think, well, he loved it, and I'm going to push through. Like, I'm almost lucky to be alive, so I've got to do it. So I go two ways. Like, some days I can be literally like working myself up to no end and go for blood tests left, right, and centre, or other days I might run. Like,
yeah.
everybody running, you're alive. Like, how dare
Yeah.
you? It gives you this extra kind of motivation. So it's complex, and I think no one really can understand that, because I've seen it happen to somebody who's really fit and healthy, so why it's going to happen. And I'm almost, Sophie's only got one parent now, so
Yeah.
I have to prepare, I have to get everything in order, to make sure, because I think, well, I
I
could die.
know, I know. It's that awareness of mortality, isn't it? And that thought
Yeah,
that, what if this happens to me? What happens to my kids? There's nobody left to look after them.
yeah,
So, I mean, I need to I need to redo my will actually, because yeah. Although I suppose as they get older, I mean, obviously you still need to do it. But my eldest is 16 now, and I do think, not that I'd wish that responsibility on him, but I do feel like the older he gets, at least I know that there'll be an adult that loves them. And God, that's a depressing thought, isn't it? My
that is
16-year-old
hard.
raising my children. I should run. I don't run, but I did, and I like to get this into as many
Mhm.
episodes as possible. I did do the Manchester Marathon when I was
Oh,
grieving. Yeah, because
well done.
I googled it and it was the flattest, so that was why
Yes.
that Manchester, and also the connection to Ben. And yeah, it was awful, horrendous. Would never do it again.
What year did you do it? Because Josh did it in
2019.
2019, did
Yeah,
23. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
and then I don't think I've run since. Not even like to the end of the garden.
well, a marathon, you've
I've
done
done
your
my
duty,
bits.
then
I've
you're
done my
absolutely fine.
bits. Quite. What do you think then? Being a very young widow in this world, how did you find people's reactions? Because I'm going to hazard a guess you were the only person that you knew in this situation at the time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think people were just in utter disbelief and shock. And no one knew anybody this young. I was only married for 3.5 years. I think everyone was just in absolute disbelief, but then it starts to creep in of, well, she's young, you
Oh, you
know.
meet somebody else, all of that sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
Or
Yeah.
then you have it the other way where, oh no, you can't meet anyone for years and years and years.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of it was almost people were putting opinions on there with not intentional, but yeah, it was a mixture of mixture of things, but it's really complex because it adds a whole new layer. I would almost become jealous of people who were widowed later in life, and then it was
Got to say
yeah, it was a bit
goodbye.
mixed.
I was jealous of people whose
Yeah,
husbands had cancer. I mean, I wouldn't wish that
yeah.
on anybody, but of course,
Mm.
there's actually, there was meant to be a chapter in the book called "At Least You Got to Say Goodbye," but I forgot to put it in. There you go. There's a little exclusive for you, because it's you were just, at least you got to say goodbye. And of course, there's that age-old debate of, is it better to lose somebody suddenly or through illness? And there isn't an answer, because
No.
it's horrendous to watch them die, but it's horrendous to lose them suddenly. But you feel jealous of other people, and people who are like going through really difficult divorces, and you're like, but they have their kids every other weekend. You're not having to do it all the time. And did you find people would kind of offer comparisons, like, oh, I understand my dog died, or I understand my husband plays a lot of football, and you're like, no, no,
Yeah.
no, no, you don't understand.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely get that. It's I think people are trying to be comforting, or in a way of like, oh, we're not, and even just it's just everything's so different. Like, it's just sad. A lot of service. Obviously, the dog. I couldn't. I think someone did say something about that, and I was just
Mm.
like, I think I had to walk out of the room because
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
just
yeah.
like, no. Um, but or like compare, oh, at least it was sort of, it doesn't make it any better now, mate, or it was, at least, you wouldn't have known, and da, 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 da. But yeah, there is a lot of comparison, mate, and it just doesn't help. It's just, I think people don't know what to say. People, um, are just shy away from
They
the topic
generally
altogether.
mean well, don't they?
Yeah,
And I often say that it's better to say something than nothing. But
100%.
it is, and it is difficult, because that old foot in mouth. I mean, I look back over things I might have said to grieving people over the years, and
Mm.
I think, oh my God, did I say that? Because until it happens to you, you don't know. Um,
Mhm.
what does life look like? How do you manage things now? Are you still working full time? How are you managing Sophie?
No, so after I had Sophie, went down to 4 days, but yeah, I couldn't imagine. I was lucky in the respect I didn't have to go back to work straight away. And I think that has personally helped me quite a lot, because I would just, I mean, I avoid it for a while, but I had to sit in the grief, and I still sit in the grief a lot, obviously. Um, so I've had a lot of time to work myself, walk, like, sort a bit of life out and figure out,
Recalibrate a bit.
because I'm not the same person. And it's really sad. I don't have the same ambition, and I don't have the capacity. I think I started off going, I can do all this. And the reality is I can't. It like makes me crumble. So I'm at a stage where I'm going back to work within the next month or so. And that will look different. I've not figured that out yet, but I can't do what I did before. I can't work insane hours. And just,
You
yeah, I
can't.
don't have a team member to do it with me, and I
No.
don't want to. Like, you just change your perspective on everything.
Yeah, I had a therapy this week, and I was saying, I really need to start generating some more money, and I'm finding it really
Yeah.
difficult to monetize the podcast, because you have to be quite pushy, and and put sponsorship and things. And she sort of said to me, look, you are in a position where you can afford to just work part time. Why don't you just give yourself a bit of a break and stop pushing, 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 because ultimately you're going to burn out, and then you're no good to man nor beast. And it's true. I think we feel a lot of societal pressure. I mean, I particularly being that bit further on, well, what are you doing with yourself now? And you're like, I'm just raising my kids and hosting a podcast, leave me alone. But you do feel like you stop being kind of part of society a little bit. You feel a bit excluded. But the primary thing I have to do right now is be here for my kids. That's my main priority. And it might mean that there's no holidays, there's no, new cars or expensive presents, but actually what they need is me well and functioning. And when I push too hard, they don't get that. And then actually what you get is you don't perform well in your job or as a parent. And then you think, well, I might as well just not bloody bother. But it is really difficult. And going back into work as a completely different version of yourself. We know our brains don't work. We don't know if there's any scientific evidence for this, but we've got anecdotal evidence. Our brains don't work the same. They just don't.
Absolutely don't. The brain fog is something else that you've got to be kind to yourself in those early days. Just you can't even function day to day, and you forget everything. It's madness, really. But yeah, crazy.
I'm just glancing at my notes 'cause I knew I'd written down something, and again it was something that you've written, and it was about grieving the version of yourself that used to be positive, optimistic, and sparkly. I like the sound of
Yeah,
her, but you seem to
yeah.
me like that a lot of those traits are still there. You still seem to be like you're holding on to the
I'm really,
positivity.
really trying. Like Josh was such a, half full kind of guy. He was so positive. He actually said like a few weeks before he's been away with his mum and dad who were amazing, really great relationship with them. And he said, I remember his mum saying to me, he was like, well, you've just got to live your life. You don't know when it's going to end. Like he was that type of person where you've just got to make the most out of the days. I almost feel like I really have to do like there's obviously days I don't feel like that, and today's a good day, but I really want to not lose that. And I want that for Sophie. Like she has to have that and has to have a good life. So I do think that helps me moving forward. Like I do think what the version of yourself were before, there is traits that you don't lose yourself completely. I
No,
think you can bring things
she's
over.
still in there, isn't she? Somewhere.
It'll take a very long time, but I still want to have a positive outlook on things as much as I can do.
Yeah, I agree.
Everything's tainted, but yeah.
And it's very easy, particularly when you've got a small child, to almost lock yourself away, to shut the doors and I don't want to do anything, I don't want to see anybody. So I remember making this kind of really conscious decision that I was going to take Tabby back to playgroups, that we were going to interact with other babies and other mums. And you walking into that church hall the first time, I felt like everyone was looking at me, like everybody knew. Of course they didn't. And it was that the decision was made because I didn't want this baby who was born into so much love and happiness to be tainted by it. We know that the grief is going to affect them. We know this. I'm still seeing that now in my kids 8 years later. But I didn't want them to be defined by it. I didn't want them to be sad. I didn't want them to be exposed to nothing but sadness. And actually, that's tough. That's really tough because you almost have to put that mask on, that mask of, wind the bobbin up. But I'm so glad that I did because they aren't sad. They aren't. They, if they think about their dad, they're sad. They're not robots, but they haven't been raised in the grips of grief, I guess, which was really important to me.
Yeah, that gives me hope just even hearing that from you. It's like you want, that's the only thing when somebody asks me that question, it's like, what could you want, see in the future? And it's like, I just want to make sure that Sophie's okay, she's happy, and she has a good life. It's obviously going to be complex, but that hope. So I did that quite early on. I remember going to some groups and I was looking at people like, how do they not know? Like, is it not
seeping
obvious?
out of my pores kind of thing?
Yeah, and being, just like sometimes like early on, I just told everyone. I literally told everyone.
Yeah. Anybody open the door to somebody, my husband died. Right, yeah.
Now I'm a bit more selective. Maybe it's protecting myself or like I don't need to tell everyone. I think I'm very much an oversharer, but now I am careful in some ways as well. Because
you might find it comes around again and you start telling people, like when Sophie starts school and things like that, you might find that you have this urge to tell people, how old is Sophie? Is she 2 now, 2.5?
Yeah, 2.5. So how do I talk to her about it?
Yeah.
So I suppose I'm different in the sense that I didn't have to sit her down when she was young and tell her. I mean, I do worry a lot about what she knew from that night and, what does she remember anything? But maybe that'll come apparent as she gets older. So I think early on, because it was a coping mechanism where I said to her, then, we went to the window and I said to her, Daddy's in the sky. I can't remember what I said. It was something along those lines. And then she, as children do, they pick up on that and she does the Daddy Sky, Daddy Sky. And I spoke to a few charities and they were like, it's probably best if you reframe that to be, we look at the sky to remember Daddy. And, you need to say the words, Daddy's died, and then start to layer it as the years come on. And I remember that call and I was just in floods and floods of tears. Like, how's this even happening?
Yeah.
How can I say that? But as time has gone on, it depends when she's now at a stage where she will say things like sometimes like the other day, she's like, can we find Daddy? Let's go and find Daddy. So she's not like she remembers. You have to, and that broke me. But then you can say it, and then next minute she's playing with a doll, and you're like, "You a psycho?" Like,
little psychopaths. Yep.
Yeah. So it's complete. She's wondering. She knows he's not here, but she doesn't understand. And even if I say the word, it doesn't make sense. I think she does look up at other dads and wonder. I can see that when I pick her up from nursery. It's like kind of in this little gaze, and it breaks my heart. Oh, another thing that broke my heart, I got like an email from nursery about the Father's Day stay and play, and I was like, "Ugh, great." But it's all these things that hit hard.
What would you do with something like that? Would your dad go? Have you got like a male friend or
No,
anybody?
yeah, I've not thought about it too. I did think about whether her grandpa would go, or yeah, I thought, well, maybe I could go,
Why
you
not?
know?
You're mum and dad, aren't you? Why not?
Yeah. So yeah, it's just thinking about it. Yeah, a friend or something like that. But yeah, with Sophie, it's at the moment she's asking questions. We do things at night where every night I have a photo book that she looks through, and then Josh used to always do this thing with both of us where we have like a heart and we'd go like away. So we do like when she goes into the cot, I do like the stars and the hearts, and I always say like we love you. Yeah, and the love always carries on. The love will always be here. It does that is not. I don't use that in past tense. I'm really kind of careful how I say things. But it's hard, and it's hard, like I said, to nursery, telling them like I need you to. She might ask questions and how they will respond, or just say you don't. We'll think about that and get back to you, type of thing.
Yes.
So it's all learnings. I'm hearing things, even just listening to your podcasts, like what. Oh, we've been reading the book. I've got the book here actually. A big book.
You have. Oh, thank you.
But like reading the chapter on that, it just kind of. I mean, there's no right or wrong. I
No.
think you've got to, and it
And
might change as the years go on. But I just want to. I want to always be very open with her and emotionally open. And it's okay for her to see me cry, but just not be on the floor 24/7. I think
for you
that's
to not know the answers as well, because I found as Tabby got, I mean, the boys asked a lot of questions early on and they were able to kind of process it a lot more. But for her, I mean, I took her to this homeschool meetup a couple of weeks ago, really lovely. And she was playing with this little girl, and I was chatting to the mum, feeling a bit like the new kids because we've only just joined. And suddenly I can hear the conversation that she's having with this kid. And I'm like, oh my God, she's telling the kid about her dad. So I had to say to the mum, I'm really sorry, but I think my daughter's telling your daughter that her dad died. And she sort of almost went, oh, and I was like, no, oh, no, no, he did. And I said, I'm really sorry because it can open up a lot of conversations for other children with their parents. It can cause them to be frightened. What if one of their parents dies? And then you hit a really difficult space because I don't ever want to say to my kids, you can't talk about that. That's something we keep in private, because actually that's where the shame and the secrecy and everything lies. And I've worked really hard to not do that. But also, that kind of instantly I'm having to explain to a stranger that my husband's dead, and she's going to have really tricky conversations with her daughter. And I found that quite difficult to manage. But I think it's Tabby's coping mechanism. I think that that's how she processes it, is she tells people. She gets it out there. It's a really important thing about her that she wants people to know. But yeah, I mean, I had another friend whose ex-partner was, well, Tabby's told my daughter about her dad dying and it's really upset her. And I was like, oh shit, I'm sorry. It was kind of upsetting for my kid,
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I really like that. I think it's amazing. It's credit to you that she's emotionally open with it. I think that's,
thank
to be
you.
honest, I think that's brilliant. It's not, well, I kind of think, well,
And
the worst thing that's
also,
happened to her,
yeah.
she's talking to her friends. I think that's brilliant. I think that's the worst thing, that if she didn't talk to them,
And
and I
perhaps
know she's young,
you
but
do need children to have some awareness of death, because otherwise it's an enormous shock. I mean, I'm not saying we sit them down and go, oh, one day your grandparents are going to die, because that's a bit harsh. But for children like mine, who, I mean, they did lose a grandparent, but before Tabby was born, my parents are alive. They've never had an experience of loss like that. I don't think we'd even lost a pet at that point. So it was completely unknown territory for all of us. But yeah, I agree. I think allowing them to talk about things and express it, because we know now that not talking and silencing those feelings, it does more harm than good. But it also it's difficult as parents. It's just another bloody thing to navigate. And you might find as she starts school, because they'll often get, do a little, book about who they are and who their parents are. And I found that opened up quite a lot of conversations.
yeah.
But I put in pictures of Ben and, said my daddy lives in heaven, that sort of thing. And it's important as well, isn't it, that and sorry, I'm rambling a bit here, but you have to tell so many people. You have to tell, like, any group they go to, anybody that looks after them, you have to kind of go through this story again and again, and it becomes almost like a script, if you like.
And that's what I find really hard. Like sometimes I'd think, oh, do people think, even at this stage, I'm like a bit autopilot with it in some ways, and I think, then I think, oh, what do people think of me? But you
Yeah.
just get to a point where you just like, I kind of have to just tell it, and it's probably you block the emotion a little bit.
You do.
Maybe that's coping mechanism at the moment. But that's probably, that is forevermore until she's an adult.
Yeah.
Which people don't see, that you have to deal with all these little, there's layers to it all. It's so complex.
Yeah, and
So
even
complex.
I got one doing GCSEs at the moment, and there was a poem in the GCSE English exam, and it was about the death of a father, and he coped really really well, but he was able to go and speak to his English teacher afterwards. He spoke to me, and it's that I think the realization that this grief is part of you forever, and it's going to be part of your kids forever, and there's a real wanting to rail against that in the beginning. I don't want this. I don't want this for me. I don't want this for them.
So,
But the kind of acceptance part of grief does come when you accept that the sadness is going to be part of you forever. But it's a tough weight to carry, because you are thinking, well, I've got to carry it forever, but so have they, and I don't want that for them. I don't want that. I want them to have a normal life. But all you can do really is try and create the best life around it.
100%. I mean, yeah, I still do resist, it's like this grief. At the beginning, I was like, there's naively, there's an end. There's
Yeah, 5 stages, tick, tick,
you
tick.
know, you come, and it's like now coming to that point where I'm like, I've never accepted why Josh died, 'cause it's ridiculous, and I don't really know why
Ridiculous
or
is a good
how.
word.
But now it's like learning to be okay with the conflicting emotions and have multiple truths. I think I couldn't see that even probably a month ago, but I'm now kind of seeing, well, yeah, I can, that is possible. To have lots of different, everything's a jumble. I think my life before was very black and white. Now my life is very grey. It's all
Yeah.
it's mixtures of grey. So yeah.
And what about things like milestones? I mean, you'll have to manage the first year anniversary. I imagine Christmas last year was a bit of a blur for you because it was so early on. Birthdays. I mean, these are all things that I think other people don't understand. It's how lonely it is to plan a birthday party for a child without their father, and to be the only one hanging the decorations up, and trying to build a bike the night before. All these sorts of things that people perhaps don't see beyond the funeral and the tears.
Yeah, definitely. We had Sophie's second birthday was about a month. Was it about 2 months? Yeah, a month and a bit after Josh died, and that was really, really. I don't remember much, to be honest. I just did a big Paddington birthday, invited quite a lot of people, and I was just
bit of overcompensating.
Just drinking the wine and just being on the
Same.
autopilot. I was just in this zone. I remember just being in this zone. I think everyone was just looking at me like worried, like, "Shush, you okay?" And I mean, those early on Christmas was absolutely horrendous. Like I just still do. I walk around like, what the fuck? Like I just in absolute disbelief. Christmas was really bad. What I found the toughest, though, what surprised me, was the days where I thought, oh, it's about, Mother's Day and my birthday were the worst. Like Josh's birthday, I had them all actually. Yeah, Josh's birthday, like on the surface, it was the only thing about it was a lovely day. I went out for a run, I had a massive emotional breakdown, crying, and then we went for lunch with his family, and we were at the seaside, we were at the beach. It was, it was nice. It was actually a nice day. The run up was worse than the actual day, as people say, and you felt worse that Tuesday before. Yeah, and then but my birthday and Mother's Day was, I think it's because they would treat you, or how special Josh would have always made those days, and then I think that's when the loneliness really sets in, because you're like, and people don't, they assume though those days won't be as bad as the other days. So yeah, my birthday really stung, whereas in the morning it was just Sophie and I was like, I can't believe this is it.
This is our life. And she's too little to make you even make you a card at this point. As they get older, I mean, mine really surprised me last Mother's Day, because I think I'd had a massive tantrum the year before. Yeah, you're an ungrateful little shit, that what mums do. So they all got me something for Mother's Day, and I was so grateful, and I was so grateful. But same as you, and my birthday's quite close to when Ben died. My birthday's second. He died on the 12th, and so you're in the run up, and I've tried everything. I've tried doing parties. I've tried ignoring it, but it still hits me. And I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. It's because the other days are the days that, you might have made special together, or you'd have made special, but those are the ones where he would have made it special for you. And suddenly it's that stark realization that nobody's going to do that for you. And I think understanding that, realizing or accepting that nobody's coming in to save you, that's a real
Absolutely.
tough pill to swallow, because I've been in relationships consistently all my adult life. I mean, I even got remarried after Ben died, and I'm now on my own again. And it's that learning how to take care of me as well as everybody else.
Yeah,
And it's a bit of an eye opener, isn't it? Because I realised how much I'd relied on other people in the past.
definitely. I think I'm really learning that I think my friend, I can't fault a lot of my friends have been amazing. But you come to that point, you're like, the only person who's going to get you through this, or I don't think you ever heal, but heal you daily
Mm.
is you.
Yeah.
That's really when you realise that you're like, wow, like I've
Ah,
actually got to do it
shit.
completely on my own. Yeah, there's no one, you can read all the books, you can do everything, but the only person who's going to help yourself is you. And that hit me. I think it hit me just a couple of months ago. I was
Yeah.
like, I've got to do
The
this,
buck
and it's
stops
just
here.
me. Yeah,
Mm.
and I think I was the same as you. Josh and I was together for an amazing like 10 years, and then I mean before that, yeah, I was in another relationship. So I've never really been single, so I
No.
was like, well, I'm a widow, so I didn't. It was like, well, what do I do? Like,
Yeah.
how do I?
And your
How do I
evenings as
function?
well. It's not like you can go out down the pub and, with your mates. You've
No,
got somebody who needs you at home and you perhaps don't even feel like it. And then I think, about meeting somebody in the future and think, but where am I going to meet him? Well, I post a
yeah,
podcast from my garden and I hang out with my kids. Woo! What a catch.
you're right.
I am a total catch. So you mentioned that you've done some therapy, some EMDR, which I'm still planning to try at some point. I'm a bit scared, a bit of a wimp about it, but I do want to try it. What do you think? And I know this is a little bit of a how long is a piece of string question, but what do you think has been the most influential or the most helpful thing that you've done during the grief process so far? It's
It's a
lovely when
big
people do that with no prep, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it changes over time. I think really early on, I remember a few days after Josh died, just ringing a helpline. I think it was like a local council one and being like, help, like
Me.
I need help. I knew straight away. I was like, I need some help. And I remember signing up for, I think it was like the night after where I had to Google like, is there a widow? Do people get widowed in their 30s? And it was widowed and young. And
Yeah.
just at that moment, I needed to feel that I wasn't alone. So I think really early on, it was a lot of writing. It was a lot of speaking to people, and just, I think even if it was friends, I was just literally talking at them. Like I just needed someone to sit and listen with me. I think a lot of people did say like, let me know you can help me. And that's the worst thing you can
No,
do.
just let me
Absolutely.
vomit my feelings at you.
Yeah, or just be I can't tell you what I need because I have no
Mm.
idea. So a lot of that, and then I started doing. I probably shouldn't have done it, but I started doing therapy with a few different people because I was almost like I need to try it and do different things. And people say you should only really do like one person, but I was just like, give me the help. Like I need to talk to people. I need to like let it all out. So it was that. Walking was amazing. Connecting with other widows. So I did in the local area. I've met a few. Some of I consider friends, and they've got young children. So it was like okay, or just people a little bit further down the line. Um, and then I started doing contrast therapy, which is it's not very well. It's basically between you're in a sauna, so it's you're in a sauna, then you're in an ice bath, and it's all shocking your nervous system.
Oh.
And honestly, I see the I came. I'm going to the first session. It was with other people because it was like do it together and whatnot. And I was just this nervous wreck of a person of just showing myself, and I just like blurted it out, and everyone was just like in utter disbelief. And I just kept going every week, and it was almost like I saw myself. Like I felt like after I did it, I felt a bit calmer, and I just felt better in myself. And it definitely helped regulate my nervous system. So I'd recommend that to anybody to try that.
You know what,
And
Charlotte?
it's
Do you know what I've got in my garden?
well,
I've got an ice bath. But I haven't used it for ages. I'm going through a phase like you. I was at a point where I was really struggling with my mental health. I was on the floor. I was looking back, perimenopausal, and I didn't know what to do. So I got an ice bath, and I kind of worked on the basis, did a bit of reading, that the idea was that if I could get myself to the point where I sat in cold water for 3 minutes, I was kind of beating my nervous system. I was like beating the anxiety. I was like, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And it's something to do with taking back control, isn't it? But I'm a very much a fair weather ice bather, and I really would like a sauna. I can't afford one, but I'd like a sauna because then I think I'd have that as the reward afterwards, and I might be more inclined to get in the damn thing. But isn't it amazing how you go out searching for these things? Pre-widowhood, would you have sat in a bath of ice water? I bloody wouldn't.
No, I still no, yeah, absolutely. It's like I just had to look for something that I needed to find a cure, and I know there isn't a solution. But I'm a very solution driven person, but yeah, did that, and then EMDR has helped in the trauma side of it. So I've listened. There's a lot of trauma with finding Josh and the shock and the absolute suddenness of it from going from a completely normal life and then finding your husband dead is just something that is
Nothing
horrific.
prepares you for it.
No, nothing. And that has done a lot of work. It's very strange how it works. I can't even really explain it. I mean, it's you really have to go into it and basically follow a light. But it works. It does work. It kind of reprocesses the memory, so it's not the forefront of your mind all the time, and you don't go in the loop with it. It helps a lot with the guilt for me. I still, obviously, the guilt will never completely, but it has helped it settle, if that makes sense. So I'll go back and do a few more sessions, but it's helped alongside doing the talking therapies, for sure. So
And I'm like this. I run at things head first. And my therapist, who I've been with for 4 years now, she would say to me, there is no quick fix for what you're going through. There isn't one. And I wanted to go and do mushrooms. I wanted to go and do EMT. I wanted to do all these kind of obscure, quirky fixes. And actually, it was her that sort of said, maybe let's just slow that down again, because what you want to do is you want to fast track through everything. I'm like, yes, of course I want to fast track through everything. I don't want to feel like this. And it comes back to acceptance that it's a slow process, and I will never feel back how I used to feel. But I quite like who I am now. I have a really happy life. My kids are well. I'm well. Things are good. Yes, I wish my husband was here every day, but it's not that all-consuming, I can't lift my head up grief. It's getting easier. It's his birthday on Friday, actually, and I've been feeling a little bit wonky, and it's that realisation, oh, yeah, okay, there's an important date coming up. It's funny.
yeah.
Right, Charlotte. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. You have, especially for somebody so early on in their grief, you have spoken incredibly eloquently about the process you've been through and about Josh and your daughter as well, and the love that the three of you shared. I have one hope for you, and my hope is that the guilt begins to abate a little bit, because it breaks my heart to see how much of that you're carrying and how unnecessary it is. I do understand it. I wish I'd never suggested we'd had a scuba dive on honeymoon. I wish I'd, told him not to go that morning. I get it. But I hope that over time that does ease for you, because you don't deserve that at all. You clearly were and are a devoted wife and mother, and you deserve the happiness and joy to come back into your life, which I genuinely believe it will. I do.
I hope so, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Now, if anybody who's listening has been affected by today's episode, you absolutely can reach out to me. I'm at widowed_AF on Instagram, and I can pass on any messages to Charlotte as well. Charlotte, do you want to share your socials or anything like that? Do you have those open?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm Charlotte Rose Jenkins on Instagram. I'm just happy to talk about that, the charity side of things, cry and SADS and all that kind of thing. That's
amazing.
Good.
And let's kind of build this widow network out. Let's all make contact. And actually, funny, I'm just going to say one more thing. But when you are widowed, it's a bit like when you have a baby. And you have to join the baby groups and you have to find your tribe, because your life's changed so much. And I think there's a correlation with widowhood. You've got to go out there, be the new girl, find your tribe, and then it's those people that will get you through. So welcome to the WAF tribe, Charlotte. You're very welcome here.
It's horrible to join, but
it's a horrible
also
club,
lovely.
but there's some nice people in it, right?
100%.
In that case, I'm going to say goodbye now, and I will be back with you all next week with another story from the forefront of widowhood. Until then, you take care of yourselves and you take care of each other. Thank you once again, Charlotte, for your beautiful episode. Take care. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode helpful, hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you think someone else may benefit from this, please do share. We'd also really appreciate it